compact high-performance Android tablets has become quite the crowded space with new small tablets from brands such as Red Magic, Cube, and Xiaomi, but there's one brand that has been consistently releasing high-end, performance and gaming-focused small-form Android tablets. And if you guessed Lenovo, then give yourself a digital pat on the back, because Lenovo is back with their Legion Y700. Which for many has become the gold standard, and for a long time the only real choice for a high-end tablet in this smaller form factor. So I invite you to join me, Rob the Retro Tech Dad, as we dive into the Y700 Gen 4, which returns with more power, some new tricks, and fan-favorite features. But is it enough to hold on to its crown and remain the king of small? Let's get this show on the road and properly introduce the new Legion Y700, with the newest iteration being the Gen 4 model, and much like other Legion branded Lenovo products, we get that slick black packaging, and unfortunately I can't read what's on here, but I will hope for the best and assume that this is the newest model, which is powered by Qualcomm's latest, the Snapdragon 8 Elite chipset that has been seen many times on the channel before. And of course, we will be putting it to the test with a nice selection of gaming and emulation in just a little bit. But that's not all that's new here, as we have a slight update to the already excellent 8.8-inch 1610 LTPS display that has been seen on prior generations, but this time around we do get an increased resolution of 3040 by 1904 with a 408 ppi, which is up from the 2560 by 1600 resolution that we saw in the prior generation. We do still have support for up to a 165Hz refresh rate, but with a slight increase in brightness from 500 to 600 nits. The increase in resolution is definitely welcome here, as text and images are now sharper than ever, and while this is not an OLED panel, this display is still one of the best in its space, with very strong color reproduction, viewing angles, and solid enough brightness to enjoy indoors under normal conditions, as well as being bright enough for some outdoor usage. Much of the design here remains quite similar from prior generations of the Legion Y700, and I've actually owned every iteration of the Y700. But amazingly, this is the first time that I've officially covered the Y700 on the channel since I started YouTube. The tablet has a very clean design with the Legion logo at the center in the back, and one of the things that stands out to me is just how thin the tablet is, coming in at about 7mm, as well as how light it is, coming in at only 340 grams. And while we do have a camera bump out, it's not something that I think will bother most with the tablet, especially since in the hands it does really feel solid and high end. The Y700 is available in a few different configurations, and it does feature 12 or 16GB of LPDDR5X RAM, as well as either 256GB or 512GB of UFS 4.1 internal storage. And probably the most important addition, or I should say return, is the very much loved microSD slot, which was omitted from last year's version and is now back here with the Gen 4 model. Now, one of my favorite things about the Y700 is the inclusion of two USB Type-C ports, which does have support for data, video out, and charging. And speaking of charging, we have a larger battery here from prior generations, coming in at 7600 mAh with support for 68-watt fast charging, as well as support for bypass charging. And as always, I will have some real-world battery rundown times later on in this video. So going front side, we have an 8MP front camera, which certainly is not going to be anything groundbreaking, but it's still usable and serviceable. And on the back, we have a 50MP camera with flash that certainly does its job. But again, don't expect anything amazing here, and really given its use case, it's not a huge deal for me personally. The Y700 is equipped with stereo speakers. There's one on the left and then one on the right side, and these perform better than you would expect given the size and thinness of the Y700, which get very loud, and even when I was doing my battery testing at 50% volume, it was impressive how audible it was at that level. Now, I do wish the volume was scaled a little bit differently in Android, but that's a minor issue, and at the loudest level you can really feel those speakers pumping out the bass, and again, it's pretty impressive given what we're working with here. Now, you will notice that we have one of the USB-C ports right below the speaker on the right, and yes, this is centered, a very important detail for those of us that enjoy using telescopic controllers of all sorts. When in the landscape orientation, at the top we have the volume up and down buttons, as well as the power button, and then moving a bit over we have the micro SD slot, as well as a microphone. Finally, at the bottom we have the other USB Type-C port, and as I mentioned, having two ports is a great feature, especially for those of us that game, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Out of the box, the Y700 ships with Lenovo's ZUX OS, which is built on Android 15, and since this is the Chinese version of the tablet, it does ship with support for either the English or Chinese language out of the box. And the Chinese ROM is kind of a mixed bag, as we do have some limitations here, which I will talk about more in a bit, but I do like the inclusion of the gaming focused features like the Game Assistant, which allows you to bring up performance adjustments on the fly when in-game, and even things like a built-in frame counter, and this is something that we have seen in the prior generations of the Y700. Now looking in the box, we have some of our usual suspects, like a tool to get that micro SD tray out, some inserts, a USB Type-C to C cable, as well as a power adapter. And as I've mentioned, this is the Chinese version of the Y700, and as of right now, the Gen 4 is only available in China. And there's a good likelihood that we will see this version make its way globally, but right now, if you are interested in purchasing this, places like AliExpress or GizTop, which is where I actually purchased my Y700 from, will be your best bet. Now the version I have is the 12GB 256GB variant in black, which is $499 at GizTop. But of course pricing will vary depending on where you are located, and if you are outside of the US, I definitely say keep an eye out on pricing at AliExpress for the best deal. And I guess we will have to wait and see if Lenovo will bring this one out to additional markets. Now I'm going to skip over my usual benchmarks for this chipset, since I found that the Y700 Gen 4 performs as I would expect with the Snapdragon 8 Elite chipset, and so if you are curious about numbers that are similar, or maybe performance improvements coming from prior generations of Snapdragon, definitely check out my other videos where I cover the Snapdragon 8 Elite, and I will have a few of those in my description and on screen. Instead, let's focus in on something that is actually brand new for the Y700, and you might have noticed on my thumbnail for this video that I just put one single word on it, finally. And that actually relates to the new dedicated controller for Lenovo for the Y700, simply known as the G9, and the reason why I say finally is because it's taken Lenovo 4 generations to catch on to what some of the community has already been creating for this tablet, which is a dedicated controller solution. The G9, when paired with the Y700 for which it was designed for, definitely looks like many of those awesome community creations, but now we have it directly and officially from Lenovo in collaboration with Gamesir. So let's talk about the G9, since many of the options that I have covered here on the channel will all work great with the Y700 since it has a centered USB-C port, and as a result we can use all of the great telescopic options like the Absolute S9, Gamesir G8 Plus, Razer Kishi Ultra, Gamesir X5 Lite, and even the ELO Vagabond. I have covered all of these controllers in the past, so check out some of my other tablet videos if you are curious about them. I actually held off on this video because I was waiting for this controller to finally arrive. And now that it's actually here, let's really dive into this thing, and we kind of get a review in a review with this. So let's open this box up, and inside we get the controller component as well as the piece that holds the tablet in place, some inserts, and even replaceable analog stick caps in various different sizes. Now what's neat about the G9 is that it should be compatible with prior generations of the Y700. Unfortunately, I can't test that out myself since I have actually always sold the prior model to help fund the newest one, and so I only have this Gen 4 on hand. Now putting this all together is fairly simple. The centerpiece gets placed into the back shell like so, or you can actually opt to leave it out, and then we simply drop the tablet into this with the cutout for the camera obviously matching up. Now when you do this, definitely press in on all the 4 corners to make it nice and secure, and you will get a little subtle click that lets you know that you've done that. With that, we're actually all ready to dock this back shell into the controller itself, and you basically just line up the USB-C port, which is angled slightly downwards to help get it into the shell. It's a little bit cumbersome at first, but I've actually gotten pretty good at this and can get it going very quickly once I understood how it all came together. And once you do that, you will want to press down on all the corners, as well as at the top and bottom in the center, and it will pop into place, and you can see that looking around this, it's pretty nice and secure. There is a little tab on the back that lets you lock the back shell into place, and really the only area that I noticed where it wasn't fully flat was by the corner where the camera is, but this is really minor. Everything else seems to line up nicely here, and as a whole, when everything comes together, this is pretty awesome. So let's take a closer look at these controls, and at the top we have our stacked shoulder buttons and triggers, and I love the large size of these, which makes them very easy to reach and press down on. The shoulder buttons have a very subtle clickiness to them, and the triggers have really solid travel with just the right amount of resistance, and they just really feel good to press down on. What's cool is that right behind these triggers we have a locking mechanism so that you can either keep it as a full trigger or turn them into a button for games where you might want that rapid fire reaction. The locking mechanism is just okay, and it's a little hard to adjust, especially when you're trying to unlock it, and I much prefer the way Lenovo did this with the Legion Go S, for example, which is a bit smoother. Now at the top, the G9 has the controls for both the volume adjustment as well as the power button, and basically these are all just plastic pieces that sit on top of the physical buttons that exist on the tablet. And while this works, it's not great. The volume control definitely leaves a bit to be desired here, since it's very hard to press down on, especially for the volume up where I really have to press down hard to get it to register. Luckily, the G9 supports some button combinations much like other Gamesir controllers, and so, for example, if you press down on the Legion button and then press up or down on the D-pad, this will actually adjust the volume, and honestly, it's a much preferred way of doing this. Now the power button is a bit better to press down on, but I really do think this could have been handled in a different way, considering this is hardwired to the tablet, and so maybe having actual controls built in that didn't rely on the physical buttons on the tablet itself would make more sense here. But the button combinations definitely work. So looking around the G9 controller, and you probably noticed these very pronounced grips that we get here, and these are quite substantial, giving the G9 controller a really awesome grip. And if you have larger hands, you will definitely appreciate these, as the grips on this are larger than even on the Legion Go S. And the G9 definitely feels nice in the hands, with the front portion rounded and smoothed out to allow your palms to rest on it, giving the support that is needed here. The placement of the face buttons, analog sticks, and D-pad are all within reach, with the D-pad and the right analog stick placed further inset to allow for comfortable play regardless of where you place your thumbs. We get awesome full-sized Hall effect analog sticks here that also come with fully removable caps to set it up in a way that works best for you. The D-pad is nothing amazing, but it works well enough with a decent pivot in the center, and we do get some movement from top to bottom and left to right, for example. The D-pad is memory-based, as well as the face buttons, which are nice and large with a decent amount of travel. They are quite similar to Legion Go S, but maybe not as quiet. Now we do get a few other things here at the front, including the Start, Select, a Legion button, and then the M button, which are all very quiet, have a subtle clickiness to them, and very short travel. The M button is used to program the G9 controller in various ways, including adjusting the RGB lighting at the front, with the ability to dim or completely turn it off, as well as adjusting the rumble feedback built into the G9, and programming the rear buttons L4, R4, L5, and R5. This took a bit of trial and error to figure out, but since this is designed by Gamesir, it does actually work quite similar to other controllers of theirs. Now you might have noticed that we have a clear piece of plastic at the left side, which allows the front camera to still work with the G9 controller attached. And finally, we have two cutouts for the speakers, which basically takes the audio from the left and right sides of the tablet and gives them a space to move through. Now it would have been neat to have the controller provide speakers of its own to improve on the audio experience, but this actually works a lot better than expected, with audio still coming in loud and clear. And then on the back we have two additional programmable buttons and a different look at those pronounced grips with the texturing on them, and then just some of the Legion branding with that back shell, as well as the rear camera, which remains completely unobstructed with the G9. Finally, at the bottom, we still have access to the secondary USB-C port so that we can charge the tablet without needing to remove it from the shell. And I will say that I tested various cables and some work better than others because of the opening that is available here on the USB-C port. And finally, all the way on the right, we have the addition of a 3.5mm headset port, which is nice since the tablet itself does not provide one. Now, as much as I love the comfort, full-size controls, and just in general what the G9 is trying to achieve here, there are some little things that I've encountered just using it day to day, and for sure one of the more annoying things is how the tablet's display sits flush and right to the edge of the plastic border of the G9 controller. This isn't necessarily a bad thing in terms of a finished look. The only issue with this is that the Android navigation becomes a bit annoying, since there's no real way to swipe in to get those gesture controls for navigation, including swiping down to access the quick menu in-game. One of the easiest ways around this is to simply switch from gesture navigation to the three buttons, which does mostly solve that problem for me. I will admit, it's possible I am missing some features here since I did have to use Google Translate on the included documentation, but it does look like I covered all the features within the button combinations here. I have a link to the instructions translated in my description in case you need those button combinations. Now, one last thing, I did want to compare this controller as a package to Lenovo's own Legion Go, just to kind of give you an idea of just how large this controller combination is, And the Legion Go has an 8.8-inch screen as well, and as you can probably see here, the Y700 with the G9 is definitely not a small combo, and it even gives the Legion Go and Legion Go S a run for size. The same can be said for its total weight, which comes in a little over 700 grams, and so it's not light by any means. And for example, if the Y700 was paired with Gamesir's X5 Lite here, you could save yourself 220 grams or so, which is much lighter, but the nice thing is that we do have options for the Y700. So wrapping up with the G9 and outside of the small issue with the fitment at the top corner by the camera, and then some of the other smaller details, this is a pretty awesome package overall, and really the only thing I can say is that while it's not overly difficult to get the tablet in and out of this shell, I do think that for most the ideal solution is just to leave this as a complete package. But I really do love what Lenovo is doing here, taking the Y700 to the next level, and there is also a G9 Pro controller on the way, but as of right now, I don't know when that is going to be released. Alright, so let's finally get into some gaming, and specifically start out with native Android games, and because I have covered the 8 Elite before, I wanted to spend time with some different games than usual. So if you are curious about other games, including some of the usuals like Genshin Impact, Fortnite, Call of Duty Warzone, and many others, there's a good chance that it has been covered here before. But the reality is that essentially everything available in the Play Store will run extremely well with the Gen 4 Y700. And so I can use this as an opportunity to go through different tests and showcase some other stuff, and one of my viewers actually suggested to me that I head into the new area for Wuthering Waves, which I've been told is much more demanding, and so I use this as an opportunity to test this new area out with the Y700 and the Snapdragon 8 Elite. It was also a good opportunity to get some playtime with this game, and just having solid playtime with a game like this, using the G9 controller with the Y700, I will say it's really an awesome experience with this combination. For Wuthering Waves, we are fully maxed out with the graphics settings available to us, with that 60 frames per second target, using the performance mode on the Y700, and it just seems like no matter what the game throws at this, it is running very well, and running well even over longer play sessions, which I had with Wuthering Waves. And I actually have another viewer request for the Snapdragon 8 Elite, which was Punishing Grey Raven, which is actually my first time playing through the game, and it's quite a lot of fun, but given how well Wuwop performed, it's probably not all that surprising that this game likewise is having no issues with the Y700, using all the settings to the highest possible and staying comfortably locked to that 60 frames per second target. Now, I'm a huge fan of racing games in general, and I'm always trying to find new racing experiences to enjoy on Android, and I've been showcasing Racing Master quite a bit recently, but a new one that I discovered is Drift Racing 3v3, which is a new racing game that dropped on the Play Store, and it is a free-to-play game, but I do enjoy the drifting mechanics in this one, and in particular the graphics are really awesome, and a nice way to showcase some of the capabilities of the Snapdragon 8 Elite. And for this game I am using just the balance preset with the ultimate graphics setting, high special effects, and a 60 frames per second target, with the Y700 having no issues keeping this frame rate nice and steady. And let's wrap this Android showcase out with probably the most popular game here, and I typically like to showcase Call of Duty Mobile Warzone, which I've done quite a bit with the 8 Elite chipset, and so let's check out Call of Duty Mobile instead. And admittedly, it's been a while since I've played this game, but one of the things that I don't like about mobile is the very limited controller support, which requires a Bluetooth controller that is explicitly supported by the game, which is why I'm using the Absolute S9 here, which has a Bluetooth mode so that I can enjoy the game with the controller easily instead of relying on gamepad mapping. Anyways, this game is absolutely no issue for the Y700 to run, and I have it set to use the Balance Performance preset with the Ultra Frame Rate option, which automatically adjusts to medium graphics quality, and all the other special effects have been turned on, and no surprise that this game is running locked at 120 frames per second. Again, if you want to see more Android games running with the Snapdragon 8 Elite, definitely check out my other videos. So let's talk about emulation now, and given that this new Y700 has the Snapdragon 8 Elite chipset, a lot of the platforms that might typically struggle on weaker hardware such as PlayStation 2 emulation with Nether SX2 is going to be fantastic on the Y700. And so just like I did with the Astra, I don't want to spend too much time here because I have covered this before with the 8 Elite, and I will link on screen where I talk more about PlayStation 2, Gamecube, and Wii emulation with the same chipset. The reality is that the only limitation is the emulator itself, and so long as compatibility is there, PlayStation 2 is going to be fantastic on here. And games like God of War 2, for example, can run at 3 times the native resolution using just the energy-saving mode, which really showcases the efficiency of the Snapdragon 8 Elite, and it's definitely impressive to see. And of course, something like Shadow of the Colossus does well at 4 times the native PlayStation 2 resolution as something in between that, and then finally we can scale all the way up to 5 times the native PlayStation 2 resolution when using the performance mode. And the same holds true for other platforms like Gamecube and Wii using the Dolphin emulator from the Play Store, where we can essentially max out the upscaling available to us with Dolphin, and games like F-Zero GX for Gamecube really have no trouble hitting that max upscaling of 6 times the Gamecube resolution for the equivalent of a 4K resolution, and again completely unnecessary given the resolution of the display on hand here with the Y700 despite it being a fairly high resolution panel. Again, we see the same level of excellent performance with the Wii side, and you will definitely be able to crank things up, and something like Sonic Colors will do quite well with that max 6x upscaling that is available to us with Dolphin. Now for something a bit more demanding, let's check out Cemu for Android, which allows us to enjoy some Wii U emulation, and this emulator is a work in progress and still very much early in development, but it's still amazing to see how at this stage there's a lot that works quite well, and I'll use this video to showcase a different Wii U game, and unfortunately that does mean no Fast Racing Neo, which is always fun to show off, but instead, let's showcase a bit of Breath of the Wild, and I don't believe I've shown this game running with Cemu for Android specifically. So this is a lot of fun because like some of the other games for Cemu, Breath of the Wild features a whole bunch of options in the graphic packs section so that you can adjust things like resolution and even frame rate. And so for this game I went ahead and changed the resolution to an absolutely gorgeous and crisp 2560 by 1600 using the FPS++ option set to 33 frames per second since we do have a 165Hz panel, and the results are really solid overall. The only real bummer here is that the game does have some graphical flickering, but really this is kind of wild to see Breath of the Wild running at a resolution like this on an Android tablet. So let's switch gears completely and head back to the Sony side and talk about one of my favorite topics more recently thanks to the arrival of PlayStation 3 emulation on Android with the RPCSX emulator. And I have a whole playlist dedicated to this topic covering performance with various types of chipsets, but let's focus in on the Snapdragon 8 Elite and the Y700, and much like everything else in this video, I wanted to showcase a set of different games that I haven't before with the 8 Elite, and PlayStation 3 emulation, much like Wii U emulation, is very much a work in progress, but it's kind of impressive how much runs well with this emulator already in this early state. And with the 8 Elite, we can really turn things up and enjoy games with a 150% upscaling, which is the equivalent of 1080p and the combination of the gorgeous display at this size and resolution. Games like Tekken 6 and X-Men Origins Wolverine run quite well with some minor drops because of shader compilation. And for me, by far the most exciting game was getting MotorStorm to run at all or as well as you are seeing in this video, which I did have to turn down the settings and keep it at a 100% resolution, which is the equivalent to 720p, but I will take it because it's freaking MotorStorm running on an Android tablet, which just blows my mind. And much like PlayStation 3 emulation on Android, PC gaming on Android has been another topic that I am personally loving to cover on the channel, and I'm so very excited about, since between things like Winlator and Gamehub's Gamefusion, we have several different ways to run our PC games on our Android devices. And with the Snapdragon 8 Elite, the results are quite solid despite lacking those custom drivers that older Snapdragon chipsets have access to. I rounded up a range of different games to test here, and some are personal favorites like Stray and Control, which are both running at 1280 by 800 for that 16:10 aspect ratio, and I do have Stray set to use medium settings with a 30 frames per second cap, and this game definitely has some room to adjust settings. And it's really cool just to see Stray running this well despite some minor dips here and there. And the same can be said for Control, which I do have set to low settings and a 30 frames per second cap as well, to help keep things nice and stable. And again, outside of a few dips here and there, the performance really surprised me here. And these are some seriously impressive games to see running here. Finally, I've got 2 more games to round out the Gamefusion section, and I always love reading everyone's comments for games to test because I tend to forget about some games, and one that a viewer mentioned was Doom 2016, which definitely has been featured here before, but wow, the performance with this one was incredible, reaching above 60 frames per second frequently using a resolution of 1280 by 800 and low settings. And of course we can't forget about Grand Theft Auto 5, which is probably one of the most requested, and so I like showing it off here and there, and with GTA 5 using the same 1280 by 800 resolution with normal settings, and we are definitely getting up there for the frame rate that reaches almost 60 frames per second, and so again we have some room to adjust here if you so choose. Now, one last platform that we need to check out for high-end emulation is, of course, Nintendo Switch, and every time I put out a new video of a device that uses the Snapdragon 8 Elite, it's an opportunity just to remind everyone that as of right now, not much has changed when it comes to getting some kind of custom driver support for the chipset, and so like I've mentioned before, Switch emulation remains kind of a mixed bag with the Snapdragon 8 Elite, and basically the games either mostly work very well, or they just don't work at all, or with a significant amount of graphical issues that make them really not playable. It's a shame for sure because whatever you can get running across the various Yuzu forks like Citron, Sudachi, and Eden, or even testing stuff like Kenji and X, you will definitely find that plenty is playable, but it is still very hit or miss and just requires a lot of time to test. I've covered a lot of games that work very well with Switch emulation across every single one of my videos that feature the Snapdragon 8 Elite if you want to see some more examples. But as you can see here, I decided to showcase something different with Kirby and the Forgotten Land. And this is the perfect example of a game that works exceptionally well using the latest version of Citron with the Qualcomm 800.36 drivers, and I actually have this game set to use 2 times the native Switch resolution in docked mode, which means we are at a 4K resolution, and performance is just incredible to see here. And for a nice little treat, I did manage to get Red Dead Redemption running quite well using Kenji and X, which is actually the first time I've ever really shown gameplay footage from this emulator, despite having tested it on and off since it dropped. Red Dead Redemption is running here at a higher resolution, using 2 times the native Switch resolution, but I am in handheld mode, which is the equivalent to 1440p. But it is really cool to see Red Dead running at a resolution this high, and surprisingly quite well, despite Kenji and X still pretty rough around the edges. So, long story short, there will be plenty that really shows off the muscle of the 8 Elite, but the reality is that until something changes on the emulation side, or we get some kind of custom drivers, Switch emulation will kind of remain in this state for the 8 Elite, and as a result for the Y700 Gen 4. Now before we move on to game streaming, I did want to give the Y700 props yet again for its ability to rock TATE Mode, which still remains one of the coolest things about the Y700 with its secondary USB-C port, since we can use it in a portrait layout, but still plug in a hardwired USB-C telescopic controller like the X5 Lite here, which makes this great for Nintendo DS, 3DS, shmups, pinball gaming, and plenty of arcade-style games. And so if vertical games are your jam, this is definitely a highlight for the Y700, and personally one of my favorite things to do with this tablet, and you will be hard-pressed to find a cooler and better way to do TATE Mode on the go. Now unfortunately, game streaming from my local desktop PC using the combination of Apollo and Artemis to the Y700 hasn't fared as well as everything else we've seen on the gameplay side. And this is always a feature I love to utilize on these smaller form tablets, especially with this new Y700 and the combination of the G9 controller. Because this is the Chinese version of the Y700 Gen 4, and currently the only location it's available in, we do have limitations on the Wi-Fi bands, and this is definitely apparent when it comes to doing local game streaming from a PC. This is a real shame because being able to stream at 165 frames per second, fully utilizing the 165Hz panel here is a great use case for this nice and large display. And what's worse is that I am seeing some of the best average decoding times on an Android device staying under 1 millisecond, which is absolutely insane. Unfortunately, because of the Wi-Fi limitations with the Chinese ROM, I'm getting tons of dropped frames here. And so this experience is just not great no matter how I adjust the settings with Apollo and Artemis. So as it stands, if your primary goal is to do PC game streaming, there are potentially better options, like the Red Magic Astra, which doesn't have these issues at all. And so with that bad news out of the way, let's get some good news going. And one thing's for sure, the Snapdragon 8 Elite has proven to be quite efficient when it comes to many tasks. And with a larger 7600 mAh battery in the Gen 4 Y700, our runtimes are quite solid. And of course, first up with my latest test running YouTube on loop at 1080p with 50% brightness and volume, the battery saver on, Wi-Fi on and Bluetooth off, the Y700 managed just shy of 17 hours of on-screen time. And with some light emulation using Yoshi's Island for Super Nintendo and the same 50% brightness and volume, but with the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth turned off, with the battery saver option still on, the Y700 managed just under 15 hours of on-screen time. And this is with the G9 controller attached to it for the entirety of the test. And let's bump things up here and check out some God of War 2 using the energy saving mode on the Y700 at 3 times the native PlayStation 2 resolution with the same 50% brightness and volume, the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth still off, and the Y700 managed about 7 hours of on-screen time while connected with the G9 controller, and that is really incredible performance. Finally, for a harder emulation test, I cranked up the resolution to 5x and with the same settings as before, but using the performance mode on the Y700, and it managed just under 3.5 hours of on-screen time with this performance mode. Lastly, the charging performance was excellent, giving me a 73% charge in just 30 minutes, with a full charge from 0 to 100% taking about 53 minutes. And I did want to briefly show off the 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme stress test results, since I found the Y700 to do quite well with its thermals, which had a stability of 86.4%, using the performance mode on the Y700, and just in general I have found it to be quite stable, with no real signs of heavy throttling when gaming for a long time. And believe it or not, we've reached the end of this video, and there was a lot to cover here. And amazingly, there's more I could talk about. But in particular thanks to the addition of that new G9 controller, which really takes the Y700 to the next level, and makes it a legitimate replacement for other high-end Android handhelds. The combination of the Gen 4 Y700 and the G9 is really solid, and outside of a few nitpicks, is one worth considering if you are looking for one of the most powerful Android tablets in this size, and with this amount of flexibility, which really is unmatched, despite some of the other options that I've evaluated here on the channel, like the Red Magic Astra. As an overall package, the Y700 does a lot right, but as of right now we only have a Chinese option, which also comes with its own shortcomings, and for most this might be a wait and see for that global release. Regardless, fans of small form tablets, especially high-end ones, are really fortunate, since this space just keeps on growing, and I don't think it'll be long before I return with another one. But until then, as always, I am the Retro Tech Dad, and thank you so much for watching.